Long before cities or writing, ritual specialists were already mediating between the human and the unseen. During the Upper Paleolithic period, approximately 40,000 to 10,000 BCE, anatomically modern humans expanded across Eurasia and developed increasingly complex symbolic behavior. Archaeological discoveries across Europe and northern Asia indicate that spiritual or ritual activity was not peripheral but structurally embedded within hunter-gatherer societies. Cave systems such as Chauvet Cave, dated to roughly 36,000 BCE, and Lascaux Cave, dated to around 17,000 BCE, contain carefully arranged animal imagery, abstract signs, and evidence of repeated human visitation. The spatial organization of these paintings, often located deep within cave chambers, suggests intentional placement rather than casual decoration. Archaeologists have documented torch marks, charcoal fragments, and acoustic properties within these chambers. Records indicate that certain painted galleries possess resonant qualities, leading some researchers to hypothesize that sound, movement, and visual imagery were combined in coordinated ritual events. While no written testimony survives, the structured nature of these spaces implies leadership or direction by individuals with specialized knowledge of symbolic practice. Burial evidence further supports the possibility of differentiated ritual roles. At Sungur, dated to approximately 30,000 BCE, excavators uncovered graves containing thousands of ivory beads, spears fashioned from straightened mammoth tusk, and carefully arranged red ochre deposits. The scale of labor required to produce these grave goods suggests high social investment in particular individuals. Archaeologists uncovered no comparable ornamentation in nearby burials, indicating that symbolic status was not uniformly distributed. Such differentiation may reflect early forms of ritual authority. Upper Paleolithic art also includes therianthropic figures, human forms combined with animal attributes. A well-known example from the Swabian Jura region depicts a lion-headed human figurine carved from mammoth ivory, dated to roughly 40,000 BCE. These hybrid representations indicate cognitive frameworks that integrated human identity with animal powers. Anthropologists argue that such imagery may reflect altered states of consciousness or mythic transformation narratives. Although the term shaman originates in later Tungusic contexts, the structural features associated with transmediation, animal transformation, spirit interaction, and symbolic travel appear present in these early materials. Neuropsychological research, particularly models proposed by scholars such as David Lewis Williams, has suggested that geometric cave motifs may correspond to entoptic phenomena experienced during altered states of consciousness. While this interpretation remains debated, it provides one explanatory framework linking visual abstraction to neurological processes. The repetition of specific motifs across distant regions implies shared symbolic conventions, possibly transmitted through itinerant ritual specialists. Taken together, cave art, burial differentiation, and hybrid iconography indicate that certain individuals within Upper Paleolithic communities likely occupied specialized spiritual roles. These roles were not bureaucratic or institutionalized but embedded within mobile, kin-based societies. The emergence of ritual specialization at this stage demonstrates that structured cosmology developed alongside subsistence adaptation, rather than as a later byproduct of urbanization. As climatic conditions stabilized after the last ice age, ritual specialization adapted to new environmental realities. Before continuing deeper into the archaeological record, viewers are encouraged to subscribe to the channel and enable notifications to follow the full documentary series. Daily Nightfall releases explore historical civilizations and long-form research narratives with chronological precision and academic grounding. Engagement through comments also supports the visibility of evidence-based historical content and helps shape future topics for exploration. As the ice retreated, new landscapes demanded new spiritual explanations. Between approximately 12,000 and 8,000 BCE, the transition from the Pleistocene to the Holocene epoch brought significant climatic warming across Eurasia and the Americas. Glacial sheets receded, sea levels rose, and previously tundra-dominated environments gave way to expanding forests and wetlands. Archaeological evidence indicates that these environmental transformations altered migration routes of large herbivores, including reindeer and elk, and reshaped the seasonal rhythms of hunter-gatherer communities. Subsistence strategies became more regionally specialized as megafauna populations declined and smaller game, fishing, and plant gathering gained importance. Rock art from sites in the Altai region of Central Asia and northern Eurasia demonstrates shifts in thematic emphasis during this period. Archaeologists have documented increasing depictions of dynamic animal figures, hunting scenes, and abstract cosmological symbols layered across rock surfaces. Records indicate that some sites were revisited over centuries, suggesting continuity of ritual practice linked to specific landscapes. The recurrence of particular animal motifs implies that certain species acquired symbolic roles beyond their economic value. Seasonal mobility required coordination among dispersed kin groups. Ethnographic comparison with later circumpolar societies suggests that ritual specialists may have played a role in synchronizing migration, facilitating communal hunts, and mediating perceived disruptions in ecological balance. Burial evidence from Mesolithic cemeteries, including differentiated grave goods and ochre application, indicates emerging social distinctions within otherwise egalitarian bands. In several northern Eurasian contexts, archaeologists uncovered graves containing distinctive tools or ornaments not uniformly distributed across all burials, pointing toward specialized status. Environmental instability likely reinforced cosmological structuring. As territories shifted and animal populations fluctuated, communities developed explanatory systems linking ecological change to spiritual agency. Anthropologists have noted that later northern Eurasian traditions articulate a tripartite cosmology, upper, middle, and lower realms, connected by a central axis such as a tree or pillar. While direct continuity cannot be conclusively proven, Mesolithic symbolic layering and vertical spatial representation in rock art may represent early conceptual precedents. The transition into the Holocene did not eliminate earlier ritual behaviors but required adaptation. Economic diversification and territorial adjustment appear correlated with increasing ritual complexity. Archaeological sequences suggest that as ecological systems stabilized in certain regions, ritual practice became more formalized and socially recognized. Material continuity in symbolic motifs indicates that cosmological mediation remained central to community resilience. Across the steppe, spiritual authority became inseparable from political leadership. By the first millennium BCE, the Eurasian steppe supported expansive pastoral nomadic confederations whose mobility depended on horse domestication, seasonal migration, and clan-based alliances. Archaeological evidence from Kurgan burial mounds across southern Siberia and Central Asia reveals structured funerary practices that included horse sacrifices, ornate bridles, bronze mirrors, and distinctive costume elements. Excavations in the Altai region have uncovered graves containing antlered headdresses, iron objects, and drums or drum fragments interpreted as ritual instruments. These findings indicate that certain individuals held recognized ceremonial status within increasingly stratified tribal hierarchies. Chinese dynastic chronicles provide written confirmation of these ritual roles. Records from the Han Dynasty describe steppe leaders conducting sacrifices to heaven and consulting spiritual intermediaries before military campaigns. These texts refer to invocations directed toward Tingri, the celestial sky deity associated with sovereignty and cosmic order. Although composed from an external perspective, such chronicles document consistent patterns of ritual consultation embedded within political decision-making. Spiritual authority did not replace military leadership but reinforced it through cosmological validation. Pastoral mobility shaped this integration of governance and ritual. Clan federations required mechanisms to maintain cohesion across vast grazing territories. Ritual ceremonies conducted at seasonal encampments synchronized migration cycles and reinforced shared mythic ancestry. Archaeologists have identified ceremonial sites marked by stone enclosures and animal remains, suggesting communal rites performed at transitional moments in the annual cycle. The presence of horse imagery in both burial and rock art contexts underscores the symbolic linkage between mobility and spiritual ascent, often interpreted as metaphorical or visionary travel. Unlike Paleolithic ritual specialists operating within small foraging bands, steppe ritualists functioned inside multi-clan political frameworks. Authority became more formalized as confederations expanded. Some sources indicate hereditary transmission of ritual roles within elite lineages, although apprenticeship remained central to training. The concentration of ritual paraphernalia in high-status burials suggests recognized differentiation without forming centralized priesthoods. This structure allowed spiritual intermediaries to advise khans while remaining embedded within clan networks. Geography played a decisive role in this development. The open steppe facilitated rapid communication but also required flexible leadership capable of coordinating dispersed populations. Spiritual mediation offered a unifying ideological framework, linking celestial order with terrestrial governance. The invocation of Tingri as a supreme sky power provided theological coherence across linguistically diverse groups. Over time, this cosmological model contributed to durable political identities that would influence later imperial formations in Inner Asia. By the early centuries CE, the merging of ritual sanction and political authority had become a defining feature of steppe confederations. Similar spiritual mediation appeared independently in the Americas. Separated by oceans, societies developed remarkably similar spiritual technologies. Across North and South America, archaeological and ethnographic records document structured systems of ritual mediation that parallel developments in Eurasia. These traditions emerged independently within distinct ecological zones, ranging from Arctic tundra to tropical rainforest and high-altitude Andean plateaus. Despite regional variation, recurring structural elements, trans-induction, spirit negotiation, and cosmological layering appear consistently across cultural boundaries. In the Amazon basin, ethnographic research from the 19th and 20th centuries describes ritual specialists who employed psychoactive plant preparations, including ayahuasca, to facilitate visionary healing ceremonies. Botanical and residue analyses have confirmed long-standing use of Banisteriopsis caapi and related plants. Archaeologists uncovered ceramic vessels and snuffing paraphernalia in western Amazonia, dating to at least the 1st millennium BCE, suggesting deep historical continuity in ritual pharmacology. These practices were typically conducted within communal structures, where the specialist interpreted visions to diagnose illness or restore social harmony. In the Andean region, rock art panels in southern Peru and northern Chile depict anthropomorphic figures with exaggerated headdresses and staff-like objects, sometimes surrounded by geometric motifs. Some of these sites are dated to as early as 2000 BCE. Burial evidence from pre-Columbian contexts includes offerings such as shells, pigments, and carved objects associated with ritual authority. According to archaeological interpretation, these materials indicate individuals who likely functioned as intermediaries between community and cosmological forces. Further north, among Inuit communities in Arctic North America, Angakkuts served as ritual mediators responsible for maintaining balance between human settlements and animal masters. Ethnographic accounts collected in the 18th and 19th centuries describe seances conducted within enclosed spaces, where the Angakkuk entered altered states to retrieve lost souls or negotiate hunting success. Records indicate that such specialists were essential during periods of famine or ecological stress, reinforcing their position within otherwise egalitarian societies. Despite geographic separation from Eurasian steppe cultures, these American traditions share structural similarities. Spirit ascent or descent narratives, multi-layered cosmologies, and healing rituals grounded in negotiation with non-human entities. Scholars have debated whether these parallels reflect deep Paleolithic diffusion predating migration across Beringia or represent parallel cultural evolution shaped by comparable ecological pressures. Archaeological evidence does not conclusively resolve this question, but the recurrence of similar ritual frameworks across continents underscores consistent human responses to environmental uncertainty and social cohesion. By the late prehistoric period, increasing population density and regional interaction intensified the social role of ritual specialists. Across regions, social complexity increasingly shaped ritual authority. Power in shamanic societies was rarely centralized, but it was never unstructured. From the late 1st millennium BCE through the early medieval period, many societies across northern Eurasia and parts of the Americas were organized around kin-based clans rather than territorial states. Political authority typically rested with elders, lineage heads, or war leaders whose influence depended on consensus and reputation. Within these decentralized systems, ritual specialists occupied a distinct but complementary position. Their authority was neither monarchic nor bureaucratic, yet it was formally recognized and socially regulated. Archaeological evidence from southern Siberia and the Altai region demonstrates clear burial differentiation associated with ritual roles. Excavations of kurgan mounds dating between the 5th century BCE and the early centuries CE have uncovered graves containing drums, bronze mirrors, antler headdresses, iron pendants, and animal bones arranged in deliberate patterns. These items are absent from most contemporaneous burials, indicating specialized status. Records indicate that such objects were not simply decorative but linked to ritual performance, divination, and spirit mediation. Ethnographic documentation among Tungusic-speaking communities in eastern Siberia provides insight into how these roles were transmitted. Accounts collected during the 17th and 18th centuries describe apprenticeship systems in which individuals believed to possess spiritual calling underwent years of training under established practitioners. In some cases, ritual authority was hereditary, passed through family lines, though not automatically conferred. Initiation often involved visionary experiences, illness interpreted as spiritual selection, or demonstrable competence in healing practices. These mechanisms institutionalized authority without creating permanent hierarchies comparable to priesthoods in agrarian states. Parallel structures appear among Algonquian-speaking societies in North America. Early colonial observers recorded the presence of individuals responsible for healing, divination, and negotiation with animal spirits. These specialists did not govern daily political life but were consulted during crises, including epidemics, food shortages, or warfare. Authority was activated situationally. When communal equilibrium was restored, ritual specialists returned to ordinary economic participation within the clan. This flexible model allowed ritual authority to coexist with egalitarian political frameworks. Geography influenced this organizational pattern. In mobile pastoral and foraging societies, dispersed settlement and seasonal migration limited the feasibility of centralized institutions. Clan identity functioned as the primary social anchor. Ritual specialists reinforced that cohesion by articulating shared cosmology, mediating disputes, and interpreting misfortune. Archaeologists have uncovered communal ritual sites, marked by stone arrangements or repeated deposits of animal remains, that appear to have served as seasonal gathering points. Such locations suggest coordinated ceremonial activity linking multiple kin groups. The absence of bureaucratic religious institutions did not imply the absence of regulation. Communities monitored ritual performance through collective validation. Failure to heal or incorrect divination could damage a practitioner's reputation, leading to loss of status. Conversely, successful mediation strengthened both individual authority and clan unity. Records indicate that some groups distinguished between benevolent and malevolent practitioners, reflecting internal mechanisms of accountability. This decentralized structure contributed to the durability of shamanic systems across diverse political environments. Because authority was embedded within kinship rather than territorial administration, it adapted readily to shifting alliances, migration, and even imperial incorporation. Shamanic roles could operate alongside emerging chieftaincies or confederations without requiring formal theological codification. By the early medieval period, ritual specialists had become integral components of clan governance across wide geographic zones. Their authority rested on recognized competence, inherited tradition, and communal trust rather than codified doctrine. Within these clan systems, ritual authority intersected with identity and gender. Spiritual authority often transcended conventional social categories. Ethnographic documentation from the 17th through 19th centuries reveals that ritual specialists across northern Eurasia and the Americas included both men and women, and in some cases individuals who occupied cross-gender or third-gender social positions. These roles were not marginal anomalies but were structurally embedded within cosmological systems that emphasized liminality, the capacity to move between categories, worlds, and states of being. Among the Chukotka, records indicate the presence of male individuals who adopted female dress and social roles as part of their ritual vocation. Russian observers describe these practitioners as assuming clothing, speech patterns, and domestic responsibilities typically associated with women. Within local cosmology, such transformation was interpreted as evidence of spiritual selection. Crossing gender boundaries symbolized the ability to cross metaphysical boundaries between human and spirit domains. Their authority derived not from social conformity but from demonstrable ritual efficacy. Comparable patterns appear in parts of Central Asia. Ethnographic accounts from Kazakh and Yakut communities describe both male and female ritual specialists, with no uniform restriction based on biological sex. Initiatory illness, a recurring theme in Eurasian shamanic narratives, could affect individuals regardless of gender. Recovery through acceptance of ritual calling established legitimacy. In these cases, gender did not define eligibility. Spiritual capacity did. In North America, early colonial records and later anthropological research document diverse gender expressions linked to ritual roles. Among certain plains societies, individuals who embodied both masculine and feminine social attributes occupied recognized ceremonial positions. While terminology varied across cultures, these individuals frequently performed specialized ritual tasks, including healing and mediation. Their social placement reflected cosmologies that valued balance and duality. Rather than existing outside the social order, they occupied a clearly defined category within it. Archaeological evidence offers indirect but significant support for gender diversity in ritual contexts. Burials identified biologically as male have occasionally contained objects typically associated with female attire, and vice versa. In Siberian contexts dated between the 1st millennium BCE and the early medieval period, grave goods such as mirrors, beads, and costume elements traditionally linked to ritual performance appear in association with skeletal remains whose biological sex challenges simplified assumptions. While interpretation remains cautious, grave goods do not automatically determine gender identity. Patterns of non-conforming assemblages suggest that ritual identity sometimes superseded binary social classifications. Costume itself reinforced liminality. Ritual garments often incorporated materials symbolizing multiple realms, feathers representing the sky, iron objects associated with earth or craft, and antler elements referencing animal power. The practitioner's body became a symbolic convergence point. In societies where everyday roles were clearly differentiated by labor division, hunting, herding, weaving, or warfare, the ritual specialist's attire and performance marked a temporary suspension of ordinary categories. This structural flexibility strengthened the shaman's social position. By embodying ambiguity, ritual specialists demonstrated their capacity to navigate uncertainty, illness, ecological disruption, or spiritual imbalance. Their authority did not depend on inheritance of political office but on perceived effectiveness in restoring equilibrium. Communities assessed legitimacy through outcomes: successful healing, accurate divination, or restored harmony after conflict. It is important to avoid projecting modern identity frameworks backward onto these societies. Cross-gender roles in historical shamanic contexts were embedded within specific cosmologies and cannot be equated directly with contemporary social categories. Nevertheless, the evidence consistently indicates that ritual authority was not strictly aligned with biological sex. Spiritual vocation could redefine social placement. This dynamic also reinforced the broader pattern of decentralized governance discussed previously. Because authority was situational and competence-based, eligibility remained flexible. Gender variance did not undermine social cohesion. Rather, it symbolized the practitioner's ability to mediate across boundaries, human and spirit, male and female, clan and environment. Social authority, however, was not confined to ritual healing and cosmological mediation. In many communities, ritual specialists also influenced law, conflict resolution, and diplomacy. The universe was structured long before it was mapped. Across northern Eurasia and the Americas, ethnographic documentation and archaeological interpretation consistently identify a tripartite cosmological model: an upper world associated with celestial forces, a middle world inhabited by humans and animals, and a lower world connected to ancestors, subterranean beings, or chthonic powers. While terminology and narrative detail vary across regions, the structural framework appears with notable regularity. In Siberian traditions recorded between the 17th and 19th centuries, the sky was often described as layered, sometimes divided into multiple tiers inhabited by distinct spiritual entities. The middle world corresponded to lived terrestrial reality, while the underworld was accessed through rivers, caves, or symbolic descent during ritual trance. Among Tungusic speaking groups, ritual specialists described ascending or descending these realms during ceremonial performance, typically facilitated by drum rhythms and recitation. Comparable frameworks appear in Central Asian contexts. Turkic and Mongolic cosmologies documented in medieval sources describe a celestial domain ruled by sky deities, an earthly plane governed by human social order, and a subterranean region inhabited by spirits associated with illness or misfortune. These layered models were not abstract metaphysics but practical maps guiding ritual navigation. The practitioner's role was to traverse these domains symbolically to retrieve lost souls, negotiate with spirits, or secure protection. Archaeological parallels suggest deep historical roots for such structuring. Petroglyphs in the Altai and Sayan regions depict vertical motifs interpreted by some scholars as world axis symbolism. These include tree-like figures extending upward and downward, sometimes accompanied by birds at the top and serpentine forms below. Although interpretations remain cautious, the vertical alignment of imagery indicates conceptual layering rather than random decoration. In Northern Europe, pre-Christian cosmology preserved in later medieval Icelandic texts, particularly the Etic Corpus, describes a central cosmic tree linking multiple realms. While these texts were recorded in the 13th century, they likely preserve earlier oral traditions. The tree functions as an axis mundi, connecting divine, human, and subterranean domains. Though emerging in a distinct cultural context, the structural similarity to Siberian and Central Asian vertical cosmologies has prompted comparative analysis. Across the Americas, tripartite models appear with equal clarity. Among numerous indigenous North American societies, the sky world, earth surface, and underworld formed a recurring cosmological template. In some Algonquian-speaking traditions, thunder beings occupied the upper world, humans and animals shared the middle plane, and underwater panthers or horned serpents inhabited the depths. Ritual specialists navigated these layers through vision quests and ceremonial performance. In Mesoamerica, iconographic evidence from pre-Columbian codices and monumental art depicts a world tree rising from the center of the earth, often marked by directional symbolism. Although culturally distinct from Eurasian steppe traditions, the structural pattern vertical integration of cosmic domains remains consistent. Scholars debate whether such similarities reflect ancient diffusion or independent development. Current archaeological consensus favors parallel evolution shaped by universal human engagement with vertical environmental cues. Sky above, ground beneath, subterranean spaces below. The world tree or world pillar motif appears especially persistent. Trees occupy a unique ecological and symbolic position. Rooted in soil, rising toward the sky, and branching laterally across the human field of vision. In boreal forest regions, tall conifers would have visually embodied vertical connection. Ethnographic records from Siberia describe ritual poles erected during ceremonies, sometimes carved with notches representing celestial levels. The practitioner symbolically climbed these poles during performance, reenacting cosmic ascent. Burial architecture may also reflect cosmological layering. Some Kurgan mounds in the Eurasian steppe contain stratified construction phases, with grave chambers placed below ground level and wooden structures erected above. While primarily funerary in function, such vertical differentiation echoes broader cosmological segmentation. Similarly, cave burials and shaft tombs in parts of North America position the deceased within subterranean environments consistent with underworld associations. The tripartite model provided explanatory coherence. Illness might originate from underworld spirits, weather phenomena from upperworld beings, misfortune from imbalance between realms. Ritual action aimed to restore equilibrium across these levels. The practitioner's authority derived from perceived capacity to traverse them symbolically and negotiate outcomes. Despite geographic distance and cultural diversity, the repeated emergence of upper, middle, and lower worlds suggests a durable cognitive framework. Human perception naturally categorizes experience vertically: sky, surface, depth, and societies encoded this perception into structured cosmology. Long before cartography or astronomical mapping formalized spatial understanding, communities organized the universe through relational tiers. Every landscape carried agency. Within tripartite cosmological systems, the universe was not an empty structure but an inhabited one. Across northern Eurasia and the Americas, ethnographic documentation and archaeological interpretation consistently describe complex hierarchies of spirits occupying sky, land, water, forest, and ancestral domains. These entities were not abstract theological concepts. They were understood as active forces shaping health, weather, fertility, and social stability. Ancestor veneration formed one foundational layer of these systems. In many Siberian societies, the deceased were believed to continue existing within a distinct spiritual sphere, capable of influencing the living. Burial practices reinforce this interpretation. Grave goods, including tools, ornaments, food offerings, and animal remains, suggest preparation for continued existence beyond death. In some regions of the Eurasian steppe, graves were revisited or maintained, indicating ongoing relational ties between living clans and their forebears. Among numerous indigenous North American communities, oral traditions describe ancestors as protective presences linked to specific lineages or territories. Rather than distant deities, these figures functioned as guardians of memory and identity. Ethnographic accounts from Algonquian-speaking groups record rituals performed to honor deceased relatives during seasonal gatherings. Such practices reinforced continuity between generations and embedded spiritual authority within kinship networks. Animal powers constituted a second major category of spiritual presence. In circumpolar and subarctic environments, animals were central to survival. Consequently, cosmologies framed them as persons possessing intentionality. Hunting rituals often included formalized apology, offerings, or structured treatment of animal remains. Archaeological evidence from Arctic sites reveals deliberate placement of bear skulls or reindeer antlers, suggesting reverence rather than mere disposal. Rock art provides additional insight into animal-centered spirituality. Petroglyph panels in the Altai Mountains and parts of northern Canada depict elk, deer, bison, and composite human-animal figures. Some images emphasize exaggerated horns, elongated limbs, or hybrid forms. While interpretation remains cautious, many scholars propose that such imagery reflects transformation motifs central to ritual belief. The blending of human and animal characteristics may symbolize the practitioner's capacity to assume animal attributes during trance states. In parts of the American Southwest and Plains regions, rock art includes thunderbirds, horned serpents, and other powerful beings associated with weather and water. Oral traditions collected in the 18th and 19th centuries describe these figures as guardians of specific landscapes, mountains, lakes, or river confluences. These territorial spirits reinforced ecological boundaries. Entry into certain zones required ritual acknowledgement, underscoring the perception that land itself possessed agency. Water bodies frequently held special spiritual status. Lakes and rivers were conceptualized as portals to lower realms or as dwellings of powerful entities. Archaeologists have documented the deposition of weapons, tools, and ornaments in wetlands and riverbeds across Eurasia. While some deposits may reflect loss or practical disposal, patterned repetition suggests ritual offering. These acts imply reciprocal relationships between communities and localized spiritual forces. Spirit hierarchies were rarely uniform. Some traditions distinguished between benevolent helpers and malevolent beings responsible for illness. Others described master spirits overseeing entire species, animal owners who regulated hunting success. Ritual specialists negotiated with these figures to ensure balance. Failure to observe prescribed respect could result in scarcity or misfortune. Importantly, these systems were relational rather than dogmatic. There was no centralized scripture defining a fixed pantheon. Instead, oral transmission preserved narratives explaining how specific spirits interacted with clans and environments. Variation across regions reflects ecological adaptation rather than theological contradiction. A forest-dwelling community emphasized arboreal and animal spirits. A steppe pastoral group focused on sky and herd guardians. Archaeological material culture, drum frames decorated with animal imagery, carved figurines, pendants shaped like claws or teeth, demonstrates the material embodiment of these beliefs. Such objects were not merely symbolic ornaments. They functioned as tangible links to non-human powers. Their placement in burials or ritual caches underscores their perceived potency. By conceptualizing ancestors, animals, and territorial forces as intentional agents, communities integrated environment and memory into a unified spiritual ecology. The landscape was neither inert nor passive. It was animated, responsive, and morally structured. Interaction required knowledge, caution, and mediation. For many early societies, survival required negotiation beyond the visible world. From the Mesolithic through historically documented Arctic and subarctic societies, shamanic practice was closely integrated with subsistence strategies. Across Siberia and Arctic North America, communities interpreted hunting success, fish abundance, and herd behavior as mediated by spiritual forces. The concept of animal masters or guardian spirits was central. Prey was not merely a resource but a sentient entity whose cooperation required ritual acknowledgement. Ethnographic accounts from the 17th to 19th centuries describe ritual specialists performing fasting, drumming, and spirit journeys before major hunts to ensure favorable outcomes. Archaeological evidence supports this interpretation. Faunal assemblages from Mesolithic sites in northern Eurasia show pattern deposition of animal bones in specific locations, often accompanied by ochre, stone tools, or symbolic ornaments. These arrangements suggest that certain kills were ritually treated, not simply consumed. In some Arctic contexts, bear skulls or reindeer antlers were intentionally positioned within communal spaces or graves, reinforcing the perception of animals as participants in spiritual transactions. Shamans functioned as cosmological regulators rather than economic managers. Their authority derived from the ability to maintain balance between human needs and animal populations. Ritual observances promoted ecological restraint. Overhunting, improper treatment of remains, or disregard for ritual protocols were believed to provoke spiritual retaliation, manifested as scarcity, illness, or environmental disruption. Ethnographic reports detail instances in which failed ritual observances were explicitly linked to hunting misfortune, illustrating the tangible integration of cosmology and subsistence. The role of the shaman also reinforced collective accountability. Hunting was often a cooperative activity involving multiple families or clans, and ritual ceremonies emphasized communal responsibility. Compliance with prescribed behaviors ensured both social cohesion and perceived ecological equilibrium. For example, among Chukchi and Evenki groups, preliminary ceremonies included recitation of taboos and invocations to animal spirits. Such procedures structured participation, dictating who could hunt, when, and under what conditions. Material culture further illustrates this integration. Drums, rattles, and carved figurines were essential in ritual contexts, facilitating spirit communication. In northern Eurasian sites, ethnographers have documented drum frames decorated with animal motifs, sometimes placed near hearths or hunting grounds. These instruments were not decorative. They served as intermediaries through which shamans accessed non-human agencies. Similarly, in North American contexts, ceremonial bundles containing feathers, bones, and pigment were used to secure hunting success, linking tangible artifacts to intangible spiritual authority. The symbiosis of economy and cosmology extended beyond immediate subsistence. Seasonal mobility required predictive knowledge. Migration routes, herd patterns, and environmental hazards were all interpreted within a ritualized framework. Shamans codified and transmitted this knowledge, blending empirical observation with spiritual interpretation. Consequently, belief systems functioned as an adaptive mechanism, regulating resource use and mediating risk. By embedding spiritual accountability into daily subsistence, these communities reinforced the principle that human survival depended on reciprocal relations with the natural world. Ritualized hunting practices exemplified this principle, creating a consistent system of ecological ethics rooted in spiritual sanction. As populations expanded and interregional contact increased, these ritual functions began to extend along emerging exchange networks, transforming shamanic authority into a mobile, socially integrated force. Trade routes carried spirits as effectively as they carried goods. By the Bronze Age and into the early medieval period, Extensive exchange networks connected northern Eurasia, Central Asia, and parts of the Americas. Communities engaged in the movement of furs, obsidian, copper, bronze, and ritual paraphernalia, facilitating not only material exchange but also the dissemination of spiritual practices. Archaeological evidence demonstrates that ritual specialists actively participated in these networks. Graves of shamans frequently contain non-local materials, such as imported metals, exotic stones, or uniquely crafted ornaments, indicating long-distance connections and the circulation of symbolic objects. In Inner Asia, steppe confederations spanning territories corresponding to modern Mongolia and southern Siberia illustrate this integration of ritual and trade. Archaeological investigations reveal that Kurgan burials often include artifacts originating hundreds of kilometers from the burial site, such as bronze mirrors from eastern China or distinctive metal pendants of Western steppe design. These items suggest not only material exchange but also the transmission of ritual knowledge, cosmological symbols, and ceremonial techniques across geographically dispersed groups. Shamans frequently acted as intermediaries during intertribal interactions, including negotiation, alliance formation, and conflict resolution. Written sources from early Chinese dynasties describe steppe leaders consulting ritual specialists before engaging in warfare or diplomatic exchange. Shamans invoked shared cosmological principles, often appealing to sky deities or ancestral spirits to legitimize agreements and maintain balance. Ethnographic parallels in the Americas demonstrate similar functions. Among plains societies, ritual specialists facilitated negotiations between neighboring clans, invoking spiritual sanction to enforce adherence to agreements. The comparative consistency of shamanic cosmology across large geographic areas can, in part, be attributed to these interactions. Material and ideological exchange reinforced shared symbolic frameworks, ensuring that certain ritual motifs, instruments, and ceremonial sequences appeared across culturally distinct populations. Petroglyphs, burial arrangements, and portable ritual objects exhibit patterns of similarity that suggest deliberate replication or adaptation rather than coincidental convergence. Long-distance trade also extended the functional scope of ritual specialists. They monitored the movement of economically valuable items and ensured that exchanges conformed to ritual obligations, such as offerings to spirits associated with specific landscapes or animals. In some cases, shamans were tasked with preparing gifts, performing blessings, or interpreting omens that could affect the outcome of trade. Such practices reinforced the perception that spiritual and economic well-being were inseparable. Ritual diplomacy also operated within mobile pastoral networks. Seasonal gatherings at river confluences or steppe plateaus served as both marketplaces and ceremonial centers. Shamans presided over these meetings, conducting ceremonies designed to secure harmonious relations between groups. Archaeologists have identified recurring deposits of animal remains, ochre, and ceremonial instruments at such sites, suggesting structured ritual activity accompanying trade. The movement of both objects and ideas across networks contributed to cumulative cultural adaptation. Communities integrated foreign ritual elements into local practice, selectively adopting cosmological symbols, instruments, or ceremonial sequences compatible with existing frameworks. These processes facilitated standardization of ritual behaviors without centralizing authority, maintaining the situational flexibility characteristic of shamanic systems. As exchange networks expanded, ritual specialists increasingly became mobile authorities, mediating between clans, territories, and ecological zones. Their role in economic and diplomatic contexts exemplifies the interdependence of material and spiritual systems. The subsequent adoption of agriculture introduced additional responsibilities for ritual authority, linking crop cycles, animal husbandry, and seasonal labor to ceremonial practice. Before armies moved, spirits were consulted. Historical records and archaeological evidence indicate that shamanic specialists played a central role in preparing nomadic and semi-nomadic societies for warfare. In northern Eurasia and the Eurasian steppe, shamans conducted divination rituals to assess battlefield conditions, interpret celestial and terrestrial omens, and secure the favor of spiritual forces. Chinese dynastic chronicles, particularly from the Han Dynasty period, describe nomadic confederations north of the frontier consulting ritual intermediaries before launching campaigns. These records report ceremonies involving drum rhythms, smoke offerings, and symbolic gestures intended to predict success and reinforce morale among warriors. Archaeological evidence supports the presence of material culture associated with war-related ritual. Burial sites from the 1st millennium BCE to the early medieval period often include antler headdresses, carved drums, and weapon caches arranged with ceremonial intent. Some graves feature animal remains, particularly horses and raptors, suggesting symbolic invocation of speed, strength, or martial prowess. The presence of these items in elite burials indicates recognition of ritual authority linked to martial activity. Shamanic divination was not purely symbolic. Observers noted that interpretations of sky omens, bird flight, and celestial phenomena guided strategic decisions, including timing of raids and troop movement. Drum rhythms and ritual performance fostered group cohesion, creating a shared cosmological framework that justified risk and coordinated action. Ethnographic parallels among Mongolic and Turkic groups illustrate similar processes. The shaman's guidance was both authoritative and performative, establishing legitimacy while regulating the psychological state of warriors. Ritual sacrifice also played a critical role. Offerings of animals, grains, or symbolic items were deposited at key sites or along campaign routes, signaling respect for spiritual authorities and reinforcing reciprocity with unseen forces. Chinese sources report that steppe leaders sometimes conducted these rites collectively with allied tribes, enhancing intergroup solidarity and codifying shared cosmological expectations. Archaeological traces of such deposits, including patterned bone placement and burned offerings, support the textual record. The ritualization of military action extended to training and encampment practices. Shamans participated in preparatory exercises, conducting ceremonies at temporary camps or assembly points prior to engagements. Such activities were designed to align human action with perceived cosmic rhythms, ensuring that logistical decisions, troop morale, and environmental awareness were interpreted through spiritual lenses. By embedding cosmology into military organization, shamanic authority became a strategic tool as well as a symbolic one. Moreover, military consultation elevated the social status of shamans. Success in campaign outcomes enhanced their authority within the clan or confederation, consolidating their role as essential mediators not only between humans and spirits but also between leaders and warriors. Records indicate that some shamans gained prominence across multiple clans, traveling to offer divinatory expertise in intertribal conflicts or diplomatic negotiations. Their function reinforced both social cohesion and operational efficiency in mobile, loosely centralized political structures. By structuring military practice around ritual consultation, steppe societies integrated cosmology directly into governance and strategy. This framework exemplifies the intersection of spiritual authority with practical exigency. Belief systems were inseparable from decisions affecting survival, territorial expansion, and intergroup relations. Military success, reinforced by ritual sanction, in turn elevated spiritual authority. Political authority required celestial endorsement. During the early medieval period, steppe confederations across northern and central Asia increasingly invoked Tengri, the sky deity, as a legitimizing principle for leadership. Historical records from Chinese, Persian, and Islamic sources describe rulers performing ceremonies to honor Tengri and consulting ritual specialists to confirm divine approval for military campaigns or political decisions. These shamans or spirit mediators functioned as intermediaries between khans and the perceived cosmic order, ensuring that governance was aligned with celestial sanction. Archaeological evidence reinforces the textual record. Kurgan burials from regions corresponding to modern Mongolia and southern Siberia often contain ritual paraphernalia, including antlered headdresses, drums, mirrors, and horse remains. Inscriptions and symbolic markings on bronze or stone objects further indicate that elite authority was framed within cosmological principles. Certain monuments, aligned with cardinal directions or celestial events, suggest intentional integration of ritual observance into political practice, reinforcing the sacred legitimacy of leadership. Shamans operated as active advisors, interpreting omens such as weather patterns, celestial phenomena, and animal behavior. These interpretations guided both domestic and military policy, and failure to comply with prescribed ritual could undermine the perceived legitimacy of a Khan. By embedding divine sanction within governance, steppe societies formalized the link between spiritual and political authority without creating centralized priesthoods. The result was a decentralized but ideologically cohesive structure in which multiple clans recognized a shared cosmological framework. Ritual activity also reinforced social cohesion within confederations. Ceremonies were performed during seasonal assemblies, migrations, and intertribal negotiations. Ethnographic parallels indicate that participation in such rituals reaffirmed clan alliances and codified behavioral expectations. The shaman's role extended beyond divination. They mediated disputes, regulated access to sacred spaces, and ensured compliance with cosmological norms. Material culture suggests that ceremonial objects circulated widely among allied clans. Mirrors, pendants, and drums of non-local origin found in elite burials indicate that ritual authority was not purely localized. Such items facilitated the dissemination of shared symbols and practices, contributing to a comparative uniformity in Tingri-based cosmology across vast territories. The integration of spiritual and political authority was particularly evident in military campaigns. Chinese annals describe Khans consulting shamans prior to battles, performing sacrifices to secure favorable outcomes, and celebrating victories through ritual offerings. Archaeological deposits along migration routes and seasonal encampments, including arranged animal remains and ritual implements, corroborate these accounts, demonstrating the material embodiment of spiritual sanction. This system also provided mechanisms for succession and dispute resolution. In confederations without codified legal structures, cosmological endorsement mediated claims to leadership. Shamans' interpretations of celestial or environmental signs validated heirs or candidates, reducing the likelihood of internal conflict. The framework allowed flexible adaptation to changing political circumstances while maintaining ideological coherence. By aligning political authority with celestial oversight, steppe societies institutionalized shamanic mediation as a central component of governance. Leaders derived legitimacy not solely from martial or economic power but from demonstrated alignment with cosmic order. Imperial expansion, however, complicated these relationships, as larger territories introduced more diverse populations, ecological zones, and competing cosmologies. By the 16th century, expanding states began redefining spiritual authority in northern Eurasia. Following the conquest of the Khanate of Sibir in 1582, the eastward expansion of the Russian state brought orthodox missionary structures into Siberian territories. Ecclesiastical authorities established churches, monasteries, and systematic baptism campaigns targeting indigenous populations. Archival records from the Russian Orthodox Church document administrative efforts to regulate local spiritual practices, including drum rituals, the use of ritual regalia, and spirit invocation ceremonies. Missionaries sought both conversion and the integration of indigenous populations into imperial fiscal and legal frameworks, linking spiritual compliance with political loyalty. Imperial enforcement of religious conformity varied significantly across Siberia's vast landscape. Remote communities maintained considerable autonomy, and local shamans often adapted to new circumstances by incorporating orthodox symbols into ritual practice. Burial assemblages from the 17th and 18th centuries indicate continued use of drums, antler headdresses, and ceremonial objects, suggesting that spiritual practice persisted under hybridized forms. Ethnographic records note that shamans sometimes conducted rituals in secret or combined orthodox prayers with traditional invocations, creating dual religious identities that maintained core cosmological frameworks. Decrees issued in the 18th century explicitly criminalized certain shamanic healing practices, particularly those linked to resistance against taxation, tribute, or state authority. Reports indicate that shamans who actively opposed imperial demands were punished, while those willing to accommodate new structures were tolerated. Missionary correspondence emphasizes both the administrative challenge and the slow pace of conversion, noting that enforcement was uneven due to the remoteness of many settlements. This period also demonstrates continuity in ritual objects. Archaeological finds show that drums, pendants, and figurines persisted in households and graves well into the 19th century. The retention of material culture indicates that suppression did not result in complete eradication but prompted adaptive strategies, including symbolic negotiation with imperial authority. Shamans remained mediators between human and spiritual worlds, adjusting performance to comply with new political and religious expectations. Administrative efforts reshaped, but did not eliminate shamanic authority. The Russian state's focus on conversion was intertwined with fiscal and territorial control, meaning that suppression of ritual was often conditional and uneven. Missionary strategies relied on selective tolerance, targeting practices perceived as threatening to political stability rather than spiritual orthodoxy alone. As a result, local religious landscapes exhibited a layered complexity, with indigenous cosmologies persisting beneath official orthodoxy. By the early 18th century, Christianization had introduced new ideological pressures while revealing the resilience of shamanic systems. Communities negotiated identity, practice, and material culture in response to administrative oversight, illustrating the adaptive capacity of ritual authority. While Christian missions advanced from the West, Islamic networks expanded across Central Asia. Religious transformation unfolded gradually across the steppe. From the 8th century onward, Islamic polities expanded into Transoxiana, the Fergana Valley, and adjoining steppe territories, introducing new legal, spiritual, and administrative frameworks. Persian and Arabic chronicles document interactions between Islamic scholars, rulers, and local ritual specialists. Conversion processes varied significantly. Urban centers often adopted Islam more rapidly, facilitated by courts, trade, and educational institutions, whereas nomadic communities on the periphery maintained long-standing cosmological practices. Early Islamic authorities frequently tolerated shamanic rituals, provided political loyalty, tribute, and social stability were observed. Archaeological evidence supports this pattern of gradual adaptation. Drum fragments, ritual caches, and ceremonial implements associated with pre-Islamic practice persist well into the Timurid period. Excavations in southern Kazakhstan and parts of Uzbekistan reveal ritual deposits that coexisted alongside Islamic inscriptions or architectural markers, suggesting a layered spiritual landscape. These material continuities indicate that shamanic authority did not vanish. Rather, it was negotiated within a changing ideological environment. Islamic legal scholarship increasingly addressed non-Islamic ritual activity. Trance ceremonies, animal sacrifice, and spirit invocation were progressively discouraged under jurisprudential rulings, particularly when perceived as conflicting with Sharia. Historical accounts describe ritual specialists modifying ceremonies to align with Islamic cosmology, incorporating invocations to Allah while retaining symbolic elements of ancestral or animal spirits. Such syncretic adaptations allowed ritual authority to persist without provoking punitive measures from urban administrators. Pastoral nomads maintained distinctive strategies for negotiation. Seasonal mobility, dispersed settlement, and limited administrative oversight enabled shamans to continue performing trance-based healing, weather rituals, and divination. Ethnographic parallels from later centuries suggest that shamanic figures selectively incorporated Islamic phrases, blessings, or amulets into traditional performance, facilitating coexistence between pre-Islamic belief and Islamic practice. This adaptive syncretism reinforced social cohesion while protecting cosmological frameworks that regulated ecological and social relations. Trade and diplomatic networks further influenced ritual adaptation. Islamic merchants, emissaries, and scholars transmitted texts, prayers, and ritual norms into steppe regions, while shamans conveyed indigenous practices to urban centers, creating cross-cultural exchange. Material evidence, imported beads, coins, and metalwork within ritual contexts, illustrates how economic and spiritual interaction reinforced syncretic integration. The interplay of Islam and shamanism also affected political legitimacy. In some steppe confederations, rulers publicly aligned with Islamic authority while retaining pre-Islamic ritual advisors for internal governance, health, and divination. Chronicles describe consultations between Islamic clerics and ritual specialists, reflecting pragmatic accommodation rather than outright suppression. Authority, therefore, was negotiated, contingent on balancing religious conformity with local social expectations. By the 14th and 15th centuries, Islamic influence had solidified in urban and state-centered contexts, yet shamanic practices continued in pastoral and peripheral communities. Ritual continuity demonstrates both the resilience of traditional cosmologies and the capacity for integration with new religious frameworks. Syncretic practices shaped communal identity, reinforced ecological knowledge, and mediated social obligations without eliminating pre-existing spiritual hierarchies. Imperial bureaucracies in East Asia, particularly in China, approached regulation differently, emphasizing administrative codification and direct oversight of ritual authority. Observation replaced rumor as empires documented frontier cultures. From the 17th century onward, Russian explorers, administrators, and missionaries produced some of the earliest written accounts of shamanic practice in Siberia. Travel diaries, official reports, and ecclesiastical correspondence recorded ceremonies, spirit journeys, and healing rites with varying degrees of accuracy. While many narratives were shaped by theological and cultural biases, they preserved details of ritual instruments, ceremonial sequences, and social functions that would otherwise have been lost. Reports consistently emphasized the centrality of drums, rattles, and costume in mediating between human and spiritual domains. Russian administrators described shamans performing trance journeys to retrieve lost souls, negotiate with animal spirits, or influence weather patterns. Ethnographers note that these performances often involved dramatic physical enactment, repetitive rhythmic sound, and the use of symbolic paraphernalia, all of which were systematically documented in both diaries and official correspondence. Travel narratives also recorded the social role of shamans. They mediated disputes, performed healing, and participated in clan-level decision-making. Administrative reports often contextualized these activities in relation to taxation, tribute collection, and political compliance, revealing an early awareness of the interplay between spiritual and civic authority. Despite interpretive distortions, particularly framing ritual as superstition, these sources provide empirical information on instruments, gestures, and ceremonial timing. Collectors and missionaries also preserved material culture. Observations included descriptions of carved drums, pendants, ritual costumes, and decorated sticks used in ceremonies. In some cases, explorers transported objects to urban centers, where they were cataloged in church or state collections. These artifacts, combined with written accounts, formed the foundation for later ethnographic and archaeological research. Early European accounts, including Dutch and German observers traveling in Siberia, corroborate Russian documentation. They describe trance states, interactions with animal spirits, and the social authority of ritual specialists. While sometimes sensationalized, the consistency of key details across multiple sources strengthens their historical reliability. By the late 18th century, these records enabled a comparative perspective. Observers began noting similarities between Siberian ritual forms and practices reported among other northern Eurasian and indigenous American communities. Although still filtered through theological and ethnocentric frameworks, these accounts preserved technical aspects of ritual that would be critical for later scholarly analysis. The systematic preservation of ceremonial detail marked a shift from anecdotal observation to proto-ethnographic study. Diaries and administrative reports provided both a chronological record and a cross-cultural snapshot, capturing ritual forms within specific social, ecological, and political contexts. The 19th century transformed documentation into systematic study, formalizing methodologies for recording, classifying, and analyzing shamanic practice across Eurasia. Revolutionary ideology classified trance practice as counter-revolutionary. Following the 1917 Russian Revolution, Soviet authorities instituted widespread secularization campaigns aimed at consolidating political authority and eliminating superstitious practices. Shamanic traditions in Siberia and the Russian Far East were explicitly targeted as part of this policy. Archival records indicate systematic confiscation of ritual objects, including drums, rattles, and ceremonial costumes. Shamans were prohibited from performing spirit journeys, divination, and healing rites under legal frameworks classifying such activities as counter-revolutionary. Enforcement mechanisms combined legal, administrative, and coercive measures. Arrests, fines, and forced relocations disrupted the social networks sustaining clan-based spiritual structures. Collectivization campaigns further undermined traditional subsistence patterns, weakening the ecological and communal context in which shamanic authority functioned. Reports from regional archives document repeated raids on ritual gatherings, destruction of ceremonial spaces, and prosecution of individuals deemed to challenge state ideology. Despite these pressures, ethnographic and oral sources indicate that shamanic practice persisted clandestinely. Rituals were adapted to avoid detection, often performed in private dwellings or remote landscapes. Some communities substituted non-traditional instruments or integrated Soviet symbols to camouflage performance, preserving key elements of cosmology and spiritual mediation. Material culture demonstrates partial continuity. Archaeological and ethnographic collections reveal the survival of drums, pendants, and figurines despite state confiscation. These objects were frequently hidden or repurposed, reflecting both resilience and strategic adaptation. Documentation suggests that spiritual knowledge was transmitted orally within families or tight-knit networks, maintaining ritual expertise across generations. The Soviet campaign also reshaped social perception of shamanic authority. Shamans who had previously mediated between clans, ecological cycles, and spiritual forces were now associated with backwardness, superstition, or political dissent. Consequently, younger generations were pressured to abandon ritual practice, producing discontinuities in transmission while intensifying secrecy among practitioners who remained active. Regional variation in enforcement was significant. Remote and sparsely populated areas of Siberia and the Far East experienced intermittent oversight, allowing some continuity of ceremonial practice. Conversely, communities near administrative centers faced stricter enforcement, with documented arrests and public denunciations of ritual leaders. Archival correspondence highlights the state's prioritization of politically sensitive areas, linking ritual suppression to broader goals of social control and ideological conformity. Parallel efforts were made to codify knowledge for anthropological purposes. Ethnographers operating under Soviet auspices collected descriptions of ritual, instruments, and cosmology, sometimes as a means of preservation rather than endorsement. These collections, while filtered through ideological lenses, provide modern scholars with insights into ceremonial forms and adaptive strategies. Soviet anti-religious campaigns also intersected with broader modernization policies. Education, collectivized labor, and industrialization reduced dependence on traditional subsistence economies, indirectly undermining the functional context of shamanic authority. As ecological knowledge and clan cohesion were disrupted, the socio-spiritual role of the shaman was weakened, compounding the effects of direct repression. Nevertheless, clandestine practice persisted well into the 1950s, demonstrating both the resilience of shamanic traditions and the flexibility of ritual adaptation. Oral histories collected in the late 20th century recount hidden ceremonies, symbolic substitutions, and intergenerational transmission, despite legal prohibitions. Across the Atlantic, parallel pressures unfolded, as indigenous spiritual practices in North and South America encountered missionary, colonial, and later state interventions. Traditions suppressed for decades re-entered public life. Beginning in the 1970s, indigenous communities across Siberia, Mongolia, and the Americas initiated cultural revitalization movements aimed at reclaiming traditional spiritual practices. These efforts emerged in response to decades of religious suppression, forced assimilation, and loss of ritual knowledge under colonial and state-driven policies. In Siberia, post-Soviet legal reforms formally recognized the right to practice shamanic ceremonies, allowing communities to reconstruct ritual sequences, reclaim sacred sites, and reintroduce material culture such as drums, costumes, and ceremonial paraphernalia. Community-led initiatives emphasized apprenticeship and intergenerational transmission. Elders and surviving ritual specialists assumed central roles, teaching younger generations to perform trance journeys, healing rituals, and seasonal ceremonies. In some regions of Mongolia, revival programs incorporated both local and ethnographically documented practices, bridging historical continuity with contemporary social realities. Public festivals, ceremonies, and educational workshops further reinforced communal identity, emphasizing shamanism as a marker of cultural heritage rather than solely a religious system. In the Americas, similar movements emerged among indigenous groups in Alaska, Canada, and the Amazon. Legal protections for religious freedom enabled the re-establishment of ceremonial cycles, including vision quests, healing rituals, and seasonal offerings. Archaeological and ethnographic research supported these revivals by providing historical frameworks for ritual practice, ensuring fidelity to local cosmologies and symbolic structures. Material culture played a critical role in the revival process. Surviving drums, pendants, and ritual implements, often preserved in museums or private collections, were reintegrated into ceremonial use. New instruments were crafted following traditional designs, reinforcing continuity of form and function. The reintroduction of ritual paraphernalia not only restored ceremonial efficacy but also affirmed the social status of shamans within their communities. Revival movements were frequently tied to broader cultural and political initiatives. In Siberia and Mongolia, shamanic restoration intersected with language preservation, artistic production, and recognition of indigenous land rights. Similarly, in North and South America, ritual revitalization complemented efforts to assert sovereignty, protect sacred sites, and educate younger generations in ancestral knowledge. These intersections highlight the role of shamanic practice as both spiritual and socio-political instrument. Ethnographic research documents adaptive strategies employed during revival. Communities negotiated the integration of modern materials, legal frameworks, and educational structures with traditional ceremonial forms. Apprenticeships often incorporated formalized instruction alongside experiential training, ensuring accurate transmission of ritual sequences while accommodating contemporary social contexts. The use of public spaces for ceremonies required negotiation with local authorities, reflecting ongoing interaction between indigenous practice and state regulation. Revival also facilitated comparative cross-cultural engagement. Networks of practitioners, scholars, and cultural organizations promoted knowledge exchange across Eurasia and the Americas. Conferences, workshops, and publications documented ritual techniques, symbolic systems, and material culture, fostering both preservation and innovation. In this context, shamanism was increasingly presented as a global heritage practice, attracting scholarly attention and intercultural collaboration. The resurgence of shamanic practice prompted critical debate regarding authenticity, commodification, and cultural appropriation. While many communities prioritize fidelity to historical and local traditions, global interest has introduced hybridized interpretations, ranging from academic reconstructions to New Age adaptations. Archaeological and ethnographic evidence remains central in grounding contemporary practice, providing historical continuity that differentiates indigenous-led revival from commercialized or externalized forms. Overall, the revival of shamanic traditions reflects both resilience and adaptability. Rituals suppressed for decades re-emerged, re-establishing social, ecological, and spiritual networks. Material culture, apprenticeship systems, and legal recognition facilitated continuity, while engagement with global networks introduced opportunities and challenges. Communities actively navigate these dynamics, balancing historical fidelity with contemporary realities. Revival intersected with global spiritual movements, as shamanic practice entered transnational religious, academic, and cultural discourse, shaping both perception and practice in the 21st century. Globalization transformed localized tradition into a global symbol. Beginning in the 1980s, elements of shamanic practice entered Western spiritual and New Age movements, often as part of broader interest in alternative healing, meditation, and ecologically oriented spirituality. Trance rituals, drumming, vision quests, and symbolic invocation of spirits were adopted and adapted by practitioners outside their original ethnic and geographic contexts. These reinterpretations frequently detached ritual from the social, ecological, and cosmological frameworks in which indigenous shamans had historically operated, presenting practice as an individual, therapeutic, or experiential system. Material and ritual elements, drums, rattles, feathers, and symbolic costumes were reproduced or purchased, sometimes without recognition of their cultural origin or significance. Workshops, retreats, and instructional media disseminated these practices globally, creating communities of practitioners that shared generalized techniques, rather than locally specific cosmologies. Anthropologists and cultural historians note that while these adaptations can foster interest in indigenous traditions, they often obscure historical context and ritual authority, raising concerns about cultural appropriation and commodification. Scholarly analysis highlights the tensions between preservation and reinterpretation. Neo-shamanic practice frequently emphasizes personal empowerment and psychological experience, whereas traditional shamans operate within socially regulated networks, mediating communal, ecological, and spiritual obligations. Detachment from these structures can alter both meaning and function. Critics argue that Western adaptation risks misrepresenting indigenous cosmologies, while some practitioners advocate for informed engagement, collaboration with indigenous custodians, and acknowledgement of historical and cultural origins. The global spread of shamanic practices has prompted ethical and institutional responses. UNESCO and other international bodies recognize certain forms of ritual as intangible cultural heritage, emphasizing the need for protection, documentation, and community-led preservation. Museums, ethnographic institutes, and indigenous organizations provide guidance regarding appropriate representation and the limits of external practice. These efforts aim to maintain the integrity of local traditions while engaging global audiences. Neo-shamanism also illustrates adaptive creativity. Some indigenous practitioners collaborate with global networks to teach workshops, publish educational material, and conduct ceremonial exchanges. This allows indigenous authority to shape the interpretation and transmission of practice, fostering both cultural preservation and contemporary relevance. At the same time, hybridized forms emerge that blend historical ritual with global spiritual motifs, reflecting the complex interplay between tradition, modernity, and globalization. The commodification of ritual paraphernalia, workshops, and experiences introduces economic dimensions. While these markets can generate income for both indigenous and non-indigenous facilitators, they also risk reinforcing stereotypes or decontextualized representations. Scholars emphasize the importance of understanding the ecological, social, and political frameworks underpinning original practices, cautioning against simplistic or purely aesthetic adoption. Despite these challenges, neo-shamanic practice has facilitated cross-cultural dialogue and comparative scholarship. Global networks allow for the exchange of ritual knowledge, material culture studies, and ethnographic documentation, contributing to academic and public understanding of shamanic systems. These interactions highlight both the resilience of traditional frameworks and the adaptability of spiritual concepts across cultural and geographic boundaries. Ultimately, neo-shamanism underscores the tension between historical fidelity and contemporary adaptation. While Western reinterpretations often detach ritual from localized cosmologies, they also raise awareness of shamanic systems, provoke discussion about intellectual property and cultural respect, and create opportunities for collaboration with indigenous custodians. International institutions, indigenous authorities, and academic communities continue to negotiate the boundaries of practice, emphasizing education, ethical engagement, and recognition of origin. These frameworks ensure that the transmission of shamanic knowledge in the modern era respects historical continuity, cultural sovereignty, and the complex role of ritual authority in indigenous societies. Before we continue exploring the hidden currents of human history, hit the subscribe button and click the bell icon to receive daily Nightfall history videos. Share your thoughts in the comments. What aspect of shamanic practice surprised you the most? Your engagement helps us keep uncovering the past, one story at a time.